Well, hello friends. It's certainly interesting times that we're living in. This is probably the greatest upheaval that most of us who are living today have lived through in terms of a global perspective, not just a local individual life perspective. And this has gone on longer than I think any of us had thought. Even though the warnings were it would go for a long time, we kind of thought, oh, things will be back to normal in a few months' time. And a phrase I've heard a few times over the last few days is COVID fatigue, that we're just a bit over it all. And so when things drag on, when the world's in upheaval, often there are lots of theories and answers and things put out there to seek to satisfy our hunger for answers about what's going on in the world at the moment. And so, there's lots of things that are stirring up fear and concerns, lots of questions, lots of conspiracy theories circulating around the world, especially online at the moment. Now, my aim today is not to speak about those theories, but I have become aware that some people in our church family have just asked a few questions, have been a bit concerned about some of this stuff, about end times. Are we all about to be subjected to the mark of the beast? What does Jesus say about these things? How do we live in this moment? And so, as I said, I'm not intending to speak directly about those theories or those thoughts, but I did just want to take a moment to, highlight some stuff around what does Jesus say, what does the Bible say about these things. So to begin with, what does Jesus say about the end time? Some people are saying, well, this upheaval, there's plagues, there's rumours of wars, there's this stuff going on. Are we living in the last days? And so, if we want to look at, and we can't look at everything in one, hopefully not too long video about the end times, what Jesus says, what the Bible says, but I want to draw our attention to one passage that Jesus is speaking to his followers about the end times. And so in Matthew 24, we hear Jesus speaking to his disciples, and in verse 3 we're told that as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen?" So he'd been talking about the destruction of the temple, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. And I want to highlight, something here is Jesus is talking about an event that happened in 70 AD after his birth, but he's also talking about the end times. And so this is often what happens in Scripture when we're talking prophetically, when we're reading prophetic stuff, is that there's multiple layers. We're talking about an event that happened almost 2,000 years ago, but we're also talking about an event that is to come, Jesus' second coming. And so they're asking questions about these things, and I guess in their mind these things are all going to happen at once, but that's not the case. And so Jesus answered them when they're asking him this question. He said, "Watch out that no one deceives you." And if you take anything away from this video, that's the thing that I want you to grab. Watch out that no one deceives you. That's the first thing that Jesus responds when asked about end times. He says, watch out that no one deceives you. And so that's what I'd encourage you at the moment, with all these thoughts and ideas circling around. Fear's been stirred up about certain things. I'd encourage you to watch out that no one deceives you. He goes on, "For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumours of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and all these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." And so Jesus says, watch out that no one deceives you. He says a lot of troubling things will happen in the world. Wars, famines, rumours of wars, wars, persecutions for Christians, those who put their faith in Jesus. He talks about the gospel going to all nations, and then he says, and then the end will come. Now, I don't believe that Jesus here is talking about a sequence of events that lead up to the end. I believe that he's talking about things that will come that will make us think, is this the end of the world? In 70 AD-ish, Rome had enough of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and so they came to wipe out Jerusalem. Basically, the temple was destroyed, and so that was a moment for the Jewish people where it seemed to be the end. But Jesus is saying these things will come, but the end is still to come. And some people talk about, this last bit where it says the gospel will be preached to all nations. Certainly that's the call of Jesus on our lives, and that's what we should be doing in this time. But I don't believe that means that if we're not proclaiming the gospel that we're somehow delaying the return of Jesus, or that if we reach a magic number of missionary effort, that then the end will come. These are all things that happen between Jesus' birth, death and resurrection and his second coming. They're not necessarily, so to speak, things that we can look and say, oh, this is the end times. And Jesus' encouragement in this space is to stand firm in faith. He says that many will go through these troubling times and turn away from their faith, but the one who stands firm, he says, to the end will be saved. And so in this moment we might be thinking, well, is this the end of the world? And many people have been through moments where they would have felt that way. This is the end of the world. I'm sure many felt that way when Jerusalem was conquered in 70 AD-ish. I'm sure many felt that way during World War I. Many felt that way during the Middle Age plagues. Many felt that way during World War II and many other tragedies and crises and earthquakes and events. Many people have probably had that moment throughout history where they've thought, oh, this must be the end of the world. And so Jesus warns us that all these kind of things will happen, but the end is still to come. But his primary encouragement into that space is don't let anyone deceive you. Don't let any voices come into that space to deceive you and lead you away or distract you from your faithfulness, and to stand firm in your faith until the end, whenever that may be. This thing about sharing the gospel, elsewhere it does say that, God is being patient to allow the maximum number of people to be saved. So certainly something we should be doing in this space between Jesus' birth, death and resurrection and his second coming, which I would label that entire period, which is up to about 2,000 years so far, and how many years to come we don't know. I would label that entire period of history as the end times. And so in this space our effort must be to get the good news about Jesus to all nations, that all might have opportunity to be saved. A little bit further on towards the end of that chapter, Jesus talks more about that. As I said, I don't want this video to end up enormously long, so we're not going to pick through every verse. I just want to give you a bit of a highlights package, so to speak. But in verse 36 on to 44, Jesus talks about a bit more specific, because the question of the disciples was when. And so he touches a bit more specifically on the when here. He says, but about that day or hour no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. That's very intriguing, because Jesus is saying, at least in his earthly ministry in that moment, that he did not know the day or the hour of the end of the world. And that's a sobering thought for me, for anyone who claims to know. Jesus encourages us to look at the signs of the time, yes, but anyone who is saying to you that they know that this is the end is claiming to know more than Jesus did in his earthly ministry. For me, that's a dangerous place to be getting to. Jesus says, about the day or the hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only as the Father. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, which that's the biblical story of the flood, where Noah was called by God to build an ark to preserve the creatures of creation through that moment of judgment. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the end. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. And so though Jesus does say in some of the stuff he talks about the end times to look at the times, I think by that he means realize that we are in the end times. We don't know how long that's going to be, we don't know the day or the hour, but we need to realize that we live in the last moments of history. Those last moments have lasted 2,000 years. They may last another 2,000 or less, but he's encouraging us to live in the moment of the end times. Because we don't know the day or the hour, but as I've said before, it could be before I finish speaking today. Or it could be thousands more years. The thing is, Jesus is emphasizing we don't know, and he was saying in this moment that he doesn't even know. And so the encouragement from Jesus, if we read on in verse 42, is, therefore keep watch, because you do not know what day the Lord will come. So I've said to grab that thought of don't be deceived. There's so many voices at the moment and they're not all speaking truth. Don't be deceived. The second thing I'd really encourage you to grab, this wasn't intended to be a sermon, but I'm a preacher, so I'm getting preachy. The second thing I want you to grab is verse 42 of Matthew 24. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of a house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. And so the emphasis of Jesus' teaching about the end times, the end moment when the last day will come is, you don't know. Yes, there are wars, there are rumours of wars, there are plagues, there are famines, there are earthquakes, there are disasters, there's persecution of believers, there's execution of believers. There's the preaching of the gospel to all nations, but you don't know when the end will come. So watch and be ready. Be waiting, be faithful for the coming of Jesus. Don't live as if, it's way off, it's out there. Live each moment as if it is any moment Jesus might return. There's an urgency to these moments, because Jesus may return at every moment. Any moment. But we also need to live with persistence and perseverance, because it may not be in our lifetime. On average, if we add up all the believers throughout history, the average experience is of dying, not of Jesus coming back in our lifetime. And so we live with the view to this moment and its urgency, but persevering for the long haul. Jesus follows up, and I'm not going to read them, but then with 3 parables, 3 stories about what it looks like to watch and be ready. And I'd encourage you to read them. In chapter 25, it's called the parable of the 10 virgins. It's about making sure your lamp is filled with oil, making sure that you are ready for the coming of Jesus, and doing your business with God. And by that I mean, putting your trust in Jesus for your salvation. He talks about how we use this time. There's a parable of the talents, or in my translation here, the heading is the parable of the bags of gold. It's about being faithful with what God has entrusted you in this moment. That you don't know when he's going to return, you don't know when Jesus is going to return, but he's entrusted you with gifts and abilities and resources, and he's calling you in this moment, however long it is, to be faithful with it. And so my encouragement, don't be deceived. You don't know when the end will come. But be faithful, live with urgency and persistence. One of the other things that I have noticed out there is some concerns about the mark of the beast, which sounds like a really scary thing. It sounds like something that we should definitely be afraid of. And it's something that has come up throughout history over and over again. Fingers been pointed in different directions about, I think that's the mark of the beast. I think that's the mark of the beast. I think that's the Antichrist. So I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I did just want to dive into where this comes from biblically, and hopefully allay some fears in that process, because we certainly don't think we should be afraid. And so the mark of the beast is something that comes from Revelation, which is one of the more interesting letters in the Bible. It's written in what's known as apocalyptic literature, which means it's prophetic. It's speaking into the moment it was written, but it's speaking into the future as well. And it uses super graphic imagery. So there's beasts with horns and wings and ears, and it's speaking about real life, but it's using these metaphorical, super graphical images. That is John, who wrote Revelation, says this was what he saw in the Spirit. But he saw it in the Spirit about reality. And so Revelation 13 is where we get this reference to the mark of the beast, and there's several beasts spoken about in Revelation. And so the second beast that is spoken of is the beast of the earth. In Revelation 13:16, we read this. It says, it also forced, that's the beast, all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. And so when we read that in 2020 or any time in the modern world, that seems super out there and cryptic and confusing. And so what we need to remember is the way that John wrote this. He says, let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast. John intended his readers at the time he wrote this to understand what he was talking about. So that means that John's not really talking about something that would happen 2,000 plus years later. Re-emergence, recapitulation of this kind of thing has happened throughout history, and I believe will happen again. He is speaking, as I said, that two-layer things prophetically into the future, but it had meaning for his readers then and there. So it does carry meaning for us today, but it's different to what many people have interpreted it to be. And so it talks about a mark of the beast. And so in Revelation, this is in contrast to the seal of God, or the mark of God. And so marking someone on the forehead or on the hand is about ownership. So there's Old Testament prophetic literature that speaks about, all nations coming to God and his name being on their hand and on their forehead, and as a sign of those people now belonging to God. And so this mark of the beast is a mark of ownership in that sense. It's you belong to the beast, so to speak, if you have this mark. And so what it doesn't mean is that anything that we have to engage in to participate in buying and selling in the world must be the mark of the beast. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using money, we wouldn't be using credit cards, and that was a mark of the beast fear when credit cards first came out for some believers. But the thing about those things is they don't require us, at least in most cultures, they don't require us to worship someone other than God to use them. They might have an image of someone on them. They might be part of a system that isn't entirely healthy and godly, but it's not that we need to be apart from them. Jesus spoke about coins with Caesar's face on them, and he said, well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. He didn't require his people to completely separate from the economic world of his time, and I don't believe he's requiring that of us now. What it is about is, who do you worship? And so this number 666, which seems cryptic to us, I want to assure you there's no magic power to the number 666. Definitely not my favourite number, definitely not something I want to put on anything, but there's definitely no magic power to the number 666. John says, let the reader calculate it. Now, Hebrews and many ancient people used something that's quite odd to us at this time. They used numbers for letters, and they would add up words and things like that. And that's kind of a big rabbit warren to go down. But most, what I believe, reliable biblical scholars, through several different ways, through any kind of way that John's original readers would have read this, see this as a clear reference to the Emperor Nero, who's one of the most persecuting emperors that ruled over the Roman Empire. Was not a fan of Christians, would basically mass murder Christians. And so if we're to overlay this idea of the beasts and there's definitely talks about the dragon in Revelations, which is a clear reference to Satan, with the Roman Empire, and something that developed strongly around following on from Julius Caesar and the emperors that followed him, was the worship of the emperor. And so the declaration required by the Romans, those who lived in the Roman Empire, was that Caesar is Lord. Now that clearly clashes with Jesus is Lord. And so you've got a war of two kingdoms here happening. And so we read in history that at certain times during the Roman Empire that people were required to provide a certificate of having sacrificed in worship to the image of the emperor before they'd be allowed to participate in commerce. So that was very much you have to deny Jesus. You have to worship the emperor or another idol before you can participate in that economical system. And so we shouldn't see this as something that causes fear about any kind of banking system, any kind of digital technology, unless we are required to deny the worship of Jesus and worship someone else to participate in that. So as a follower of Jesus, if you are required to reject Jesus and to worship another and to receive a mark of that, then that would be a kind of a redoing, an experience of the mark of the beast, an allegiance to one other than Jesus. I'm not saying that the mark of the beast isn't something to come in the future. It definitely was John speaking into his present situation and the believers that were being persecuted around the world at the time. I'm not saying it's not necessarily a challenge to come for believers as well. But it's not something that's something secret that you could unwittingly receive. It's not something that you're going to receive, for example, a vaccine and, you didn't know it, but you also got the mark of the beast in that package. Unless they make you, worship someone other than Jesus to get the vaccination, which I hope that's very unlikely to happen. This was most likely symbolic of any attempt by power to force believers to reject Jesus to participate in society. And so whenever that is the case, then as followers of Jesus, we must make the decision to not participate. If we are required to reject Jesus to participate in any facet of society, be that buying or selling, be that whatever realm of society, then we must choose to withdraw from that. But barring that decision, that coercion to reject Jesus to worship another, we're called as followers of Jesus to participate as fully as possible in society and to seek to see it renewed and transformed in his name. There's constant temptation to compromise. And so we need to live in faithfulness to Jesus. I want to wrap this up just with a final encouragement to beware of what you're listening to. We did speak about this on Sunday, but I really want to encourage you to be aware of what and who you're listening to. Don't feed your soul with stuff that makes you afraid. Elsewhere in John's Gospel, Jesus was talking to his disciples about what was to come and the turbulent events of his arrest, his crucifixion and his resurrection. And he said, I've told you these things so that you might have peace. Jesus spoke about the end times that we might have peace. John wrote Revelation to the believers in the world of his day, that's spoken for thousands of years to believers, to encourage us to endure, to be faithful and to have peace in Jesus in the midst of turbulent times where believers have even been persecuted and crucified and executed for their faith. And so if you're feeding on stuff that's stirring up fear and anxiety and tension and stress in you, then I would suggest that that is not what Jesus would be speaking into this moment. And so be careful what you listen to. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul has this word of encouragement to Timothy. He says, if anyone teaches otherwise, other than Paul's teaching of the gospel, and does not agree to the sound instruction of our Lord Jesus Christ and to godly teaching, they are conceited, which means prideful, and understanding nothing. They have an unhealthy interest in controversies and quarrels about words that result in envy, strife, malicious talk, evil suspicion, and constant friction between people of corrupt minds who have been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a means of financial gain. And so don't feed yourself on stuff that's just purely about trying to stir up controversy, fear, anxiety, friction. Because Jesus would be speaking a word of love, peace, faithfulness, endurance into this moment. And so how do we live right now? Well, we live with perseverance. I can't tell you how long this season of life will go for. I don't know the hour or the day of the end of coronavirus, let alone the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know how long, so we live with perseverance, but we also live with urgency that this could very well be the last day. And so my prayer for you is this, that God's grace would enable you to hold together urgency and perseverance and live out a life of faithfulness. God bless. Hope to see you soon.